night, and welcome to Fast Break Breakfast NBA Podcast. My name is Keith Parrish. I have Rob Mahoney coming up in a few minutes. We discuss which teams from last year that missed the playoffs have the best chance of making the postseason this year. It's a fun discussion because Rob and I do not agree really on these teams, but kind of importantly about the discussion I had with Rob, we recorded this podcast, and then hours later, Donovan Mitchell got traded to the Cavaliers. The most shocking NBA trade since Rudy Gobert, probably, certainly. Since Rudy Gobert got traded to the Timberwolves. There are similarities, obviously, both involving the Utah Jazz, who are tearing it down to the studs. You have the 46-win Timberwolves, made it to the playoffs, are like, hey, you know what? Let's go all in with our young guy, Anthony Edwards. We got Karl Anthony Towns. Let's get Gobert. Let's shore up this deficiency of rebounding, of rim protection, and we'll bring in an all-star to do it. The Cavaliers, they won 44 games last year. They did not make the playoffs as they lost in the play-in tournament. But they're like, you know what? We have this young guy, Evan Mobley. They also, by the way, have this young guy, Darius Garland. And they said, you know what? In the half court, we couldn't generate offense. We needed someone else to score the basketball. When teams are collapsing on Darius Garland, we need a relief valve. Karis LeVert's not that guy. And they had the opportunity to add an all-star. And both teams, Cavs, Timberwolves, pushed a lot of chips in to make this deal happen. So the episode of Fastbreak Breakfast, the audio version I put out on Thursday, does not have this intro I'm doing right now because I figured for context or as far as setting up the talk with Rob, let you know we did not know, it's apparent when you hear it, we did not know about the Donovan Mitchell deal. I had the Cavaliers as a likely team, even without this Donovan Mitchell deal, to make the postseason. Rob was a little less optimistic. But let's talk briefly about this Donovan Mitchell trade. I think it is a little bit different than the Timberwolves deal. Now, you can argue whether or not they should be viewed in the same prism. The Cavaliers, in my estimation, did not give up as much to get Donovan Mitchell. Donovan Mitchell is clearly much younger than Rudy Gobert. Donovan Mitchell, we think, is still going to have a lot of years of his prime ahead of him. I, as an initial reaction, really like this trade for the Cavaliers. Because when I evaluate trades, when a team that's pretty young or has a young star evaluates a trade, basically it all boils down to, for me, how does this new player fit with our most important piece? I consider the Cavs' most important piece Evan Mobley. Donovan Mitchell and Evan Mobley as a twosome seems like a perfect fit. Seems like a great fit. And then we go to the next level. We're like, all right, what about Darius Garland? He's kind of a scoring point guard, although Garland's a great passer. They're both not great at defense as far as Garland and Mitchell. But I think that complements well. Both guys can shoot the basketball, good three-point shooters. Both guys can play off the ball. And for a backcourt that's going to have possibly defensive deficiencies, or certainly defensive deficiencies, to have that backline of Mobley and Jarrett Allen, that is a great pairing. And then you look at the ages of the cores, as far as the core players. Evan Mobley's 21. Darius Garland's 22. Donovan Mitchell is 25. That's one of the best three-man, I think, under 25 cores in the entire NBA. The players the Cavs gave up, nothing. For me, this trade is all about the picks. The Cavaliers said, we will trade out essentially five. We will unprotect 5 straight drafts. 2025 unprotected pick, 2027 unprotected pick, 2029 unprotected pick, and then swaps in 26 and 28. Just doing some basic math. That will be the seasons, the Garland and Mobley seasons, when they are, for like their age 25 roughly to age 29 seasons. The Cavaliers are a relatively good bet, to be pretty good those years. Those players are still there. Even if Donovan Mitchell moves on when his current contract is up, you're still likely going to have Mobley and Garland, or whatever you get if you, for some reason, trade away either one of those guys. So the Cavaliers said, you know what, we can bring in an all-star to pair with this young core and be competitive in the East. Now, the Cavaliers, as they stand, it's not a perfect roster. It's not an ideal roster. There's still a gaping hole at small forward. They hilariously have no small forwards on this roster. You got Cedi Osman. I mean, Karis LeVert can play there. I think Karis LeVert, better sixth man. You give up the guy you drafted, Agbaji, in this deal. So there is still a big hole at the 3, but they're not done. They can do things. I would assume maybe this season you look to trade LeVert or Kevin Love, even if there's a salary out there where you can bring in someone to play small forward. So this team needs small forward, but also they did make this big trade, and you can call it an all-in trade, but they don't have to be all-in for this season because they had Donovan Mitchell signed for a couple years, for 3 years. You still have Mobley and Garland for hopefully, 6, 7 seasons. So it turns the Cavaliers into a very interesting and very good team. And I know there are Donovan Mitchell detractors. I'm not really one of those. I'm more of a Donovan Mitchell believer. I think he is one of the better shooting guards. I don't care about his defensive limitations so far. There might be another level he can go defensively. I mean, when he was drafted, we thought he had defensive skills. He has a huge wingspan. Hasn't really shown him that much. I don't know why he wouldn't have shown them because he's made the playoffs. He's been on good teams in the Jazz. So maybe that's a fair criticism. But I like Donovan Mitchell. I honestly, I like the pairing of him and Garland. And then the Garland and Mitchell, massive scoring potential, huge offensive firepower, to partner that with the guy who gave us like whiffs or hints of young KG, young Tim Duncan. I know it's a lot to put on Evan Mobley's plate, but everything we saw from year one was this is a special, transformative team basketball player. And just to surround him with that scoring ability, I like it. I mean, it's not without risk. The Jazz decided we will take these 5 unprotected picks. There have been reports about like what the Knicks did or did not do. Woj, after the deal was done, reported that the Knicks offered 3 unprotected picks and R.J. Barrett and Mitchell Robinson and Obi Toppin. I mean, I don't know if that's true. Woj is access journalism, so if the Knicks people say, hey, just say this, they have to say this. Maybe the Knicks are trying to save face. If I'm the Jazz, I might prefer unprotected picks from the Knicks as opposed to the Cavaliers. It's interesting, the Jazz, so they're clearly, amassing this huge draft capital, all these picks, but they are betting against Evan Mobley, and they're betting against, on the Timberwolves side, Anthony Edwards. Those aren't wagers I would make, personally. I don't know how good these draft picks are going to look in the long run. But, of course, we don't know what the Jazz internal assessment was of Donovan Mitchell and also what the likelihood it was that he wanted to stay. I think we can all, from an outsider perspective, assume Donovan Mitchell did not want to be on the Jazz long term. So, in that sense, it's a fine deal for the Jazz. It's not a bad deal for the Jazz at all. I like it from both sides, honestly. If the Jazz are like, we want to rebuild and also Donovan Mitchell doesn't want to be here, okay, cool. You got a solid return. Do I care much about bringing in Lauri Markkanen or Colin Sexton? No, I don't. I think those are, I'm sort of Sexton curious, but, I don't know if he's ever going to be a great player. And Markkanen is a fine player, but I don't think he has a role when it comes to a postseason because he's not a small forward. He's just a guy. And that's why, again, repeating myself, this trade from the Cavaliers' perspective, from the Cavaliers' side, it's just picks. Agbaji, all right, maybe he turns out to be something. Markkanen and Sexton, this is a fantasy football or basketball trade where I'm trading guys who are basically waiver wire material for a stud. It's just the picks. I don't think the Jazz care that much about Markkanen or Sexton. Those are players you could move if they play well. Maybe they will be on the next Jazz playoff team. They're fine players. But when you're making a trade to get an all-star, when you're making a trade to get a guy who is 7th in NBA history in playoff scoring average, mean, in 39 playoff games, Donovan Mitchell averages 28 points per game. The only players ahead of him, Michael Jordan, Luka Doncic, Allen Iverson, Kevin Durant, Jerry West, and LeBron James. We've seen Donovan Mitchell, while his team has fallen short, and maybe that's what detractors can fairly point out, we've seen Donovan Mitchell be awesome in the postseason. And the Cavaliers adding that, I don't know, it's super fun. Where does this move the Cavs in the Eastern Conference? I don't think it moves them to the top of the line. I think our top tier, still the Bucks and the Celtics. Next, the Heat and the Sixers. And then we start thinking, all right, there's the Raptors. There's the theory of what the Nets could be. And then I think it's Cavs, Bulls, Hawks. They're all mixed in there together. Does this guarantee they get to the second round this year? No, I don't. I would bet against them making the second round. But it gives them this young core that I think can play together. I think fits just fine. Having Garland and Mitchell and Mobley, and I'm not including Jared Allen. I mean, Jared Allen's not that old. Jared Allen's the same age, I think, or he's younger than Donovan Mitchell. Jared Allen is 24. So having that core of guys 25 and under that you can keep together for a few seasons, you can worry about getting that small forward in the future. I think it's a worthwhile gamble. I like this gamble more than I like the Timberwolves gamble. They can both pay off, but I think it's a exciting move for the Cavaliers. As far as the Jazz, I mean, who knows what they're going to do? They're going to try to move Bojan Bogdanovic. I assume they're going to try to move Jordan Clarkson, maybe Malik Beasley, maybe Mike Conley. You know, I don't know what the next, which of these current players on the next Jazz team that makes the playoffs, maybe none of them. Walker Kessler. Is Jared Vanderbilt available? I have no idea. Like, are the Jazz, is this a 2-year dip? Tony Jones from The Athletic, who covers the Jazz, is saying they're not going to totally bottom out. He expects them to maintain some level of competitiveness, which is fine. I mean, flatten lottery odds, just win some games. Although, let's be real. If the Jazz came out of this with Scoot Henderson or Victor Wembanyama, that's absolutely the goal. But a fun trade, an exciting trade. It whets our appetite for the upcoming season. And hopefully this talk that I have with Rob Mahoney will continue to whet your appetite as we look at the teams that did not make the playoffs last year and have a good chance of making the playoffs next year. And of course, when you're listening to this, remember, the Cavaliers have definitely improved their position. If you want to support our show, do that at patreon.com/Fastbreak Breakfast. We'll be doing fantasy basketball signups in September. So if that's something you want to be a part of, especially joining our negative fantasy league, make sure you sign up over at patreon.com/Fastbreak Breakfast. Visit grindcitymedia.com. Grind City Media provides the most up-to-date and exclusive coverage and analysis of the Memphis Grizzlies you can get. Grind City Media is always their home and road, providing the most comprehensive Grizz coverage. Plus, they have local and regional sports. It's all in one spot. For more information and behind-the-scenes access on the Grizzlies, go to grindcitymedia.com or follow on Twitter at grindcitymedia today. Also, if you're shopping for tickets, MLS season is ending. We got Major League Baseball going on. NFL is starting. And then, of course, coming up, we have NBA preseason and regular season. If you're shopping for tickets on the secondary market, do yourself a favor. Go to SeatGeek.com and use promo code FASTBREAKBREAK. Same as my Twitter handle, FASTBREAKBREAK. That will get you $20 off your first purchase. Code FASTBREAKBREAK, $20 off at SeatGeek. All right, now let's talk with Rob.
Hey, Keith. How's it going?
Hey, Rob. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good morning.
Good morning to you, too. Let me...
A very serene background.
Coming to you live from my closet, so we try to jazz it up a little bit, you know?
Dude, it looks good. It looks good. Closets they're fun.
It's real cozy in here. It's real cozy, surrounded by robes and jackets. Fun, I don't know if is the right word, but it's something, you know?
If you had the right jackets, you wouldn't feel like you needed that Zoom background. That's all. All right.
God, you're right.
The right retro, get one oversized shooting jacket off the NBA clearance.
There we go.
Trying to think. I saw one that was hilarious. It was like a It was some ex-Sixer. Crap, who was it? It was definitely a process Sixer who was not any good, and it was on NBA.com, and it was like, I mean, it was like $84.
Like a game worn one?
Yeah, I think it might have been game, because there's no way they printed up whoever it was. Like they didn't print up. I'm trying to think of the now. Yeah. It's a tall, skinny kid. I thought he was going to be good. Doesn't matter. But yeah, it was like
it does
down
matter.
from $350. I'm looking at the 2016 Sixers roster. We'll start the show in just a second. I
want to get to the bottom. Do you think it was a big guy? Do you think it was a wing? Who do you think it was?
No, it's a wing. And like, I'm totally blanking on the dude's name.
Is it Hollis Thompson?
Classic yes, it's Hollis Thompson. I feel like I took you there with skinny wing. I thought he was actually going to be something. But he wasn't actually any good. Turns out he was not a Jeremy Grant or Rashawn Holmes, Christian Wood. No. Someone who turns out the game did translate a little bit. All right. This is all gold. We're recording. Let's get this thing, the canonical version of the show. I'm joined right now by Rob Mahoney from The Ringer. Rob, how's it going, man?
It's going great. I'm really enjoying this late stage off-season thing we have going on, because it's both relaxing enough to actually relax, but exciting enough to get excited about the season. This is the sweet spot. This is where I want to live. I
do not miss the every night grind. I sort of do. I'm sort of like, I can't wait till the games start. But like you're saying, this kind of casual, like, it's September 1st in the morning. Should I find the Eurobasket? Maybe just turn it on in the background. That's fine, but I don't need to. And then, talking about the show, it's weird because in my podcast world, there's a calendar, and I assume it's the same with you guys. There's a calendar, and it's like, all right, what did we do last year or 2 years ago to get to the off season? And it's like, oh wait, there wasn't that long of an off. We basically had, we have on Fastbreak Breakfast a solid 6 week run up to the season where it's like, all right, I have these shows, but right now it's like we're not there yet, and it's like, what did we do 4 years ago? Oh my God, I did a clip show. I did I'm not doing the work to do a clip show. But I know it is a sweet spot. We do have to sometimes invent content.
Yes.
But also, Rob, this is your first time on the show. This is very exciting.
It is.
And we ask all our guests, whether the first time or not, about their breakfast. Have you had a breakfast today so far? Are you a big breakfast guy? What's your breakfast life like?
Love breakfast.
Great.
But deprive myself of it. It's just from
because you don't deserve it.
I don't deserve it. I'm not
self-flagellation.
Worthy.
You're like, what? I love it,
but breakfast sandwich.
I haven't been good enough. Haven't earned it.
You got to get to it. No, in my because I am washed, my breakfast these days is coffee and banana, which I'm not proud of.
Oh, it's more often than not I do that. Yeah.
But if you gave me a desert island type scenario in which some terrorist was like, you only get to eat one meal for the rest of your life and I will deliver it to you, it might be a breakfast burrito. So I just want you to know what I'm giving up with the coffee and banana regimen. A
breakfast burrito is perfect. I felt like your inclusion of a terrorist in that.
Well, he's got to be. If I'm on
it was unnecessary.
Was it?
I feel like, abandoned desert island by yourself. That's self. I mean, that lets us know what we're talking about. If you add in because your children are being held hostage, I made that excessively unpleasant. Well, I think we understand the whatever.
Well, I just wanted to complete the picture as to why I have a never-ending supply of flour tortillas in my disposal.
It's fine. I try to never do the also hey, gun to your head. Who do you pick? Blazers or Kings? Gun to your head. No, highly unpleasant. No, but for this deep off-season podcast we're doing right now, I think this is a fun format. It kind of whets my appetite for this coming NBA season. So the challenge that I gave you that we're going to do on this episode is we're going to look at the teams that did not make the playoffs last year. And then we're going to rank the 5 teams that missed the playoffs last year that we are the most confident will actually make the playoffs this coming season. We'll do it in order of most confident to least confident, because I just looked this up and this doesn't feel right. Basketball Reference is telling me that the Clippers and Lakers missed the playoffs last year. Is that?
I've heard something about that.
Yeah, that would be
whispers about it.
That would be wild if true. But all right, so we're gonna pick teams that we feel that missed the playoffs. We're not counting play-in. That's not playoffs. You missed the playoffs. but we think, most confident going in. I'm not going to step on your toes, but I assume everyone in the world has the Clippers as number one on this list. Am I speaking out of turn there?
They have to. They have to. And I think they're probably my favorite to win the title at this point, which sight unseen with the Clippers is a dicey place to be in, but there's no question they're going to be in the playoffs. Even if guys have significant injuries, even if they have some weird roster issues and sorting out the ridiculous depth that they have, they're going to be in there somewhere, right?
So you wrote maybe a month ago or so, maybe more, about the Clippers. Are they too deep? I mean, that wasn't your takeaway, but there's a thought. There's too many guys. It's a fair question. There are a lot, doing the depth chart. You're are Covington and Batum, are they 8th, 9th men when healthy? And then you have the Reggie Jackson, John Wall, and John Wall's doing all the pro-am social media posting currently about I'm that guy. He's saying, I'm that guy. I'm back. Is there an avenue where it's all right, Marcus Morris doesn't like being DNP'd?
I mean, it would not be shocking, certainly in Marcus Morris's case, but I think for a lot of those guys, right? They just have a baseline level of competent, accomplished, and prideful NBA player on their roster that is off the charts relative to the rest of the league and that is going 10, 11 guys deep. It would not shock me at all if they have to make a trade just for appeasement reasons in the middle of the season, right? Some guy is not getting the touches, the minutes, not getting serviced in the way that he would like, and therefore needs to be moved to Charlotte or wherever. That is a thing that is fully in the cards. This could happen. And yet this is a team that could trade a veteran for a future second round pick and be totally fine. It just would not make a dent in their championship equity.
I like the idea of maybe an idea to keep them in line is to threaten the trade to Charlotte.
Oh,
listen, Batum, we'll see. I know you left. I know they stretched and waved you, but maybe we'll send you back. Even if one thing about this depth of the Clippers, even if Kawhi Leonard is not Kawhi Leonard or misses time, they're still going to make the playoffs. I think. I mean, they would have. They probably would have last year. Paul George got COVID for the play-in, which was unlucky. But yeah, I don't think we need to think too hard about this one. Clippers are the most likely, and I guess we should say who they're replacing in the playoffs in the West, and it's the Jazz, right? I mean, it's just that's it. It'll get harder, I think, once we go past now the Clippers and which team they might replace. Which team that missed the playoffs last year is your second you think most likely to make the playoffs this season?
I think it's the Lakers.
Ooh.
And I don't feel super great about okay, so first of all, we should get into there's an East-West thing here that is hard to parse.
Yeah.
Because as you say, the Jazz, we got one spot pretty much guaranteed in the West that's up for grabs.
Yeah.
In the East, things are a little bit more tenuous. The top 5 teams are probably locked in. But are you betting everything that the Brooklyn Nets are in the playoffs at the end of the season? Are you betting everything that or if you particularly like one of these teams that didn't make it, that they're absolutely going to make it? There's just so many borderline cases in the East that I think it's easier to talk yourself into it. And yet none of those borderline cases have LeBron James on the roster. And I feel pretty compelled by the best guy in the field thing once we get to this level of team.
Gotcha. So I have the Lakers very low in this exercise. I'm
intrigued.
Well, the trick with the Lakers, or the unanswered question is this their opening night roster as we talk on September 1st? If they add, even if they add a Buddy Hield, I'm way more excited. I think if they add an Evan Fournier picking up contract scraps in a possible 3-way Lakers, Jazz, Knicks thing, I'm even more excited. But as the roster looks right now, and as I look to the other teams, even in the West, I'm I think this team is bad. I think this Lakers team is just flat bad. The counter argument, which you mentioned, LeBron James, but got to be honest, a little of the aura, it's faded a little bit.
Interesting.
The last couple seasons for me personally.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm too sensitive to the fact that I only needed the Lakers to not have one of the 10 worst records. And thus the Grizzlies could have drafted maybe Jalen Williams from Santa Clara. We were supposed to get this pick. And I'm LeBron, all you have to do is beat out the tanking Spurs. And he could not. So I'm a little sensitive. And now I look at this roster now and I'm what is this? It's horrible. It's like I think the Patrick Beverley edition is really, really good because everyone else in the backcourt kind of stinky. And so maybe I'm totally a lunatic, but I feel better about the Blazers. And I think I might feel better about the Kings. Like,
oh wow,
the Kings
this is where we're going.
I don't know. Maybe that might be too much. But the East-West divide does make me want to lean. All right, I don't know I want to know. So, yeah, which team in the East could get replaced is where it gets difficult. I still feel like if I'm going to number 2, I might go to Eastern Conference. Do you have an Eastern Conference team coming up next after the Lakers?
I do.
Yeah. I think we're picking between Hawks and Cavs. Which one are you feeling the most confident? Or is there a wild card? Are you all in on the Magic this season?
There is a wild card, and I hate it. I hate this wild card, but I think it's the Knicks.
Oh, I love it. Okay, great.
And it's more perspective. It's more like, of all these teams we'd be talking about, this is a team that has at least a pretty good shot to get Donovan Mitchell, it sounds like, even after extending RJ Barrett this week. They have a chance to significantly shake up their roster. They already got Jalen Brunson in the door. They've just upgraded in a way that not a lot of these other non-playoff teams have. And I am compelled by that, even if I'm inherently distrustful of almost everything that team does. But there's just more going on there than I think with a lot of these other rosters.
So I was really worried that we would be very uniform in these rankings. I'm like, there's a consensus of thought. No one wants to go too far out on a limb. Our rankings are nowhere similar.
Again, we're going to meet in the middle.
This is great. Yeah, the premise
to extend an olive branch.
Which teams that missed the playoffs? Which 5 teams are you most confident making the playoffs? I'm clocking in the Knicks at 7th. So you had them. Ooh. You had them at 2nd.
All right.
Even if they add Donovan Mitchell, I look at the East and I'm like, I don't know if the Knicks with Donovan Mitchell are better than the Hawks or the Cavaliers, and I'm not excessively confident about either one of those teams. I saw some Vegas over-unders, and I was like, I'd take the under on both of them. But I do feel like there's a scenario like if Garland and Mobley both get significantly better, then they should be significantly better. So who's your next team? This is great. So far you have Clippers, Lakers, Knicks. I see what you're doing. This is smart. You're appealing to the listeners. This is where the listeners are.
Am I appealing to?
There aren't people who live in these other towns. All I have to do is headline and be like, Rob Mahoney picks Lakers and Knicks to make playoffs. Done.
I'm giving you the fodder.
Yeah.
Please aggregate this. Whoever you are out there, aggregate that. But no, you segued it nicely, because for me, that's the dilemma, is either the Knicks or the Cavs for that 3rd spot for me.
Yeah.
And I think the Cavs case is pretty interesting, because not only do you have the young guys, as you mentioned, who could get a year older, a year better, but I think they're just going to be healthier, hopefully. Like, they just have awful luck in terms of not just the number of games missed, but just so few games with their full roster. It was like one guy after another offsetting injuries all throughout the year. And I think just getting more healthy guys back into the rotation at the same time is going to do a world of difference for them. I think they're going to be significantly better. Part of me really wants to pick them. I just fear they might get boxed out a little bit by the combination of the Knicks getting Donovan Mitchell potentially and the Hawks getting DeJounte Murray. Like, that might kind of be enough to keep them out of the mix.
Also, we should emphasize, or we should more clearly spell out, we've alluded to it, that like, if we're picking a team that made the playoffs in the East last year who's not going to, that's where it gets really, really hard. Like, is it, I think for me, if I have to pick one, it's the Bulls. And it's just concerns over Alonzo Ball. And it's like, without Alonzo Ball, they weren't that good. And so I don't even know. I mean, like, praying for a Nets disaster maybe feels safest if you wanted to bet on a certain disaster. But it's like, I feel like we're considering, I don't think the Raptors are dropping out. I think the Raptors are too deep and too good. So it's basically like one of these teams that made the playoffs last year is not doing it this year. I honestly feel like I'm just stuck with, what am I stuck with? It's like Bulls. It's really hard.
I think it's probably Bulls. Yeah, I think the 3 you're looking at are Bulls, Nets, and Hawks.
Yeah, or Hawks. Excuse me. Yeah, Hawks after their playoff. Trae Young's playoffs last year, which is one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen in my life.
And not to will anything into existence, but that's a team that's just unusually and disproportionately relies on Trae Young to the point that if he misses a month, like that could be their season in terms of making the playoffs, you know?
I'll be honest. I misspoke and totally forgot the Hawks made the playoffs last year.
They technically did appear.
They technically did.
playoffs.
I know Trae Young, again, posted possibly the worst playoff performance for any All-Star ever, without exaggeration. You find me on Basketball Reference a worse performance in the playoffs from any player. I might just throw out any player playing 30 minutes per game.
Wow. That's a Big Ten.
I want to say, you know, Basketball Reference has that game score thing. He had some like multiple negative game scores. And that's honestly, it's hard to do. Who's your now that the Hawks are not a contender for this? I feel good about Cavaliers being included in that. Who's your fifth team?
So this was another dilemma point. And again, you already circled it up top. I think it's either Kings or Blazers.
Yeah.
And for me, I just came down to the Blazers were only 3 games worse last season than the Kings and were, by organizational standards, barely trying to field an NBA product. Yeah. Damian Lillard was not out there. And the Kings were very much trying. Like they were doing their damnedest, and I'm going to give them a pat on the back for that. I think they're going to be significantly better just from having Domantas Sabonis for a full season, among other things. But I'm just a little more confident in the Blazers. Not to say that I'm very confident that they're going to make the playoffs, but relative to the Kings, I am more confident.
Well, I mean, you've seen it. You have proof of concept.
Yes.
Damian Lillard and guys can be a pretty effective team. And I think they do have guys. I think beyond Nurkic, I'm excited about seeing a healthy Josh Hart with a healthy Jeremy Grant. Nasir Little made great strides. Anthony Simons was cooking at times last year. He got himself paid based on that. And like, I see all of that. And I'm like, if you get MVP level Dame or fringe MVP Dame, that team, I feel pretty confident could definitely hit 40 wins, 42 wins. And the idea of like, as enamored as I am with, maybe enamored's too strong, as slightly enticed and curious as I am about the Kings roster. Like, what if Keegan Murray can ball and like you are deeper and maybe they'll have a little bit of health and like their firepower seems kind of impressive. Yes. Just like Malik Monk, like Kevin Huerter, like these are all competent players. But then, and then also they finally get, you know, Mike Brown. They have like, they went into last year sort of lame duck with Luke Walton, where everyone's like,
I like lame dunk though.
Lame dunk is my new podcast. Actually, we're launching today.
This is the backdoor pilot for it.
Yeah. And the like we knew everyone circled him like, oh yeah, most likely to get fired. There's no way that guy's going to last. And so hopefully with a full off season of like having a coach you believe in, a coach who has defensive chops, and then like De'Aaron Fox has a lot to prove. And then like, so I can talk myself into it.
Yes.
But I do think I fall back into, I've seen the Blazers do it. And I think it feels a little bit safer. I've
got to admit though, you've got me Kings curious, you know, like I'm raising an eyebrow. I'm checking them out. Like I think for me, what's most interesting to them is what you zeroed in on, which is the spacing, right? It's like Herter and Monk, that specific kind of firepower alongside all these other guys.
Right.
That's something they haven't had in this current era. And I'm excited to see how that bears out.
Yeah. So I guess we have most likely you're feeling Clippers, Lakers, Knicks, Cavs, and then Blazers.
Yes.
So apologies to the Sacramento Kings. If I can include the Hawks, I'm going to,
I mean, you can, if you just want to like give them a good slap to wake them up. Like we don't even count you as a playoff team. You insignificantly appeared in the postseason.
I'm going to go. I mean, one is Clippers. I think 2, I'm going Cavaliers.
Okay.
Although maybe I'm exercising it wrong. Identifying that extra team in like which other teams could miss the playoffs besides the Jazz, even looking at either conference, it's really, really hard. But I feel like if we ran the simulation of this coming season, like 100 times, I feel most confident the Cavaliers are going to win 43 games, you know, more frequently than like the Lakers or the Trailblazers do.
Probably true.
My third is the Trailblazers. My fourth, I've decided to go with the Lakers over the Kings. Again, proof of concept. They have arguably the greatest player of all time on their team.
It helps.
And the Kings reportedly have Jeremy Lamb, which I don't know if he's still there after the trade. Maybe he'll play this year. I don't know. And then I'm putting Kings fifth. I'm putting Knicks on the outside looking in. I don't believe in the Knicks at all. I mean, I might be wrong. I want to say I've been wrong on the Knicks several years in a row, so I can keep that streak going. Where last year I was like, hey, man, like Kemba Walker, Evan Fournier backcourt with that defense, what's the worst that could happen? And, well, and then the year before that, I don't think anyone saw the Julius Randle, RJ Barrett, good from mid-range and three season. Are there any other teams that made you think at all, like, you know what? If everything went right, I could see them cracking into the playoffs.
You know, if we had talked a week ago, I think I would have been cranking the Oklahoma City Thunder bandwagon here.
Rob, that's insane.
I acknowledge that the place I'm coming from is unconventional, maybe even perverse in some circles, but something about the combination of their young guys, if Chet Holmgren had been healthy, was very exciting to me. As a team that, like, the way I put it to some of my colleagues was, you would look up on January 15th and they're 500, and it's like, how did we get here? That's kind of the future I had envisioned for them. But obviously that's not going to happen. Chet out for the season changes pretty much everything about their roster and circumstances. Unfortunate, but I would have been on here. I would have been on here trying to radicalize you.
I think when I had Tyler Parker on here a couple weeks ago, and I was like, Tyler, what's your best 5-man lineup? Like, what's the 5-man lineup you're most excited about?
Yeah.
And he included Trey Mann and Kenrich Williams. And I was like, nope. I mean,
that was it.
I like those guys just fine, but like, that's not describing a team that's better than, I mean, also part of it is the landscape of the West. That's not a team that's better than the Lakers, even as low as I am on the Lakers. That's not a team that's better than the Kings. And like, I guess Giddey could have made a leap, but like Lou Dort is fun. I don't even know if he's actually good. So that's bold. I like the optimism. I can't get there.
I get it. But now I get to have the take, but I don't have to defend it because they're going to lose. Right? No matter what happens, I win.
What we did on our show earlier this week was, the question was, if the Thunder on January 1st find that they are 14-20, who gets benched? For me, that's more like 14-20 seemed like an upper level outcome.
Yeah.
I don't know. You can't work up a story for the Wizards.
You could,
because they're one of the only teams that we haven't mentioned that is going to try. Yes. I think the Hornets and the Wizards, I don't know about the Hornets, but like the Wizards are going to try. Yeah. They're going to try to win games. And it's like, I don't know what that looks like. I feel like everyone that covers the NBA or follows the NBA, we've kind of closed the book a little bit on like Bradley Beal and Porzingis being like, those are dudes you want to build around. It's now like, I guess they could be good, but I don't know. If I squint, even then I can't get there. I don't know. Like, what's your story if like the Wizards are the one that are all of a sudden chasing down an imploding Nets team or a Bulls team or the Cavs or Hawks?
I mean, the weird thing about it is I didn't even like seriously consider them as a playoff candidate, and yet they were 2 games worse than the Knicks, and I'm making like an optimistic case that the Knicks are going to make it. I think the difference of that is the difference in their off seasons, right? It's a team that is largely standing still in the Wizards, banking on the long simmering development of the Denny Avdias, and really hoping for a healthier season from DJ Rui Hachimura. Like, all of that stuff is important to them in a way that makes me I just can't quite get behind it. And I've seen the Kristaps Porzingis thing play out. I mean, we all have in every stop, in every case, in every situation so far, in terms of what it means to your team when you rely on him to be an important part of it. It's just not where I would want to live personally, in terms of, really riding and dying on that and his health in particular. So not a case I'm particularly compelled by, I have to say.
Right. I'm if I had a couple drinks in me, I think I could get down to like a Like, if we're talking a closing five of like Monte Morris, Will Barton, Bradley Beal, like, okay, I've set up a little bit straight. You got Porzingis.
Yep.
Maybe Avdia is the glue guy, doesn't need any shots. I'm like, all right, I can see a 12-4 start to the season. It's a little 12-4 start, and then maybe
the honorary Orlando Magic.
Yeah. And then they trade away a pick. Maybe they trade 4 second rounders for some guy who's not going to move the needle that much. And then then they probably don't end up as good as the rest of these guys. Well, Rob, I think you did a good job. I think these are they're accurate. I think they're reasonable. I do feel like the big question is, and one of the fun things for fan bases is to consider, if you're a fan of one of these teams, like you really need to circle like, yeah, okay, your team's better. Who are you better than? And that's where it becomes a really difficult exercise. Cause like, all right, the Jazz are voluntarily stepping out of the way, but then in both conferences, there's like 10 teams that are like, oh yeah, well, no problem. And so it's going to be a good race. You have Robbie, anything you want to plug for us or anything we should be looking out for you?
Nothing too specific. I mean, read theringer.com about the NBA, about all kinds of stuff. Check out our podcast on the Ringer NBA show. You can find it wherever you find podcasts. I don't know. Go outside, touch some grass, eat some breakfast burritos. Like,
that's right.
I think there's lots of things you can do right now,
listener,
beyond just consume NBA content.
You deserve that breakfast burrito. I don't know what you're doing in your life today, but you deserve it. All right. You deserve it.
I needed to hear that.
You deserve it. Thanks, buddy. Look forward to you coming on again sometime.
Appreciate it.